So talk to us more about the ROI versus maintenance debate. Is most hotel CapEx actually ROI or is it preventing loss?
I think most renovations is avoiding erosion and that kind of negative ROI.
Would you say that most people in hospitality measure the wrong things?
We're in this business to make money, and it doesn't stop at revenue. They really took and embraced technology in a way that actually made guests happy. This was the first time where I really saw technology in a way that I think is that kind of that secret ROI that I had never seen before. When we look at hotels to buy, we see not clean rooms, but dirty rooms, because it really reveals what may not work in the room or guest tendencies.
Today's guest is someone who thinks about hospitality from an entirely different perspective. We don't talk about this nearly enough. It's the intersection of operations, real estate performance, and how guests actually use a space. Michael Blank is a hotel investor and operator based in DC and brings a deeply analytical lens to how hotels drive or fail to drive returns. From challenging how we define ROI in hospitality to rethinking how space is utilized beyond just RevPAR, Michael is constantly asking, are we actually maximizing the full potential of our assets? What makes his perspective especially compelling is that he's not just looking at what gets added to a property, but what shouldn't be there, how guests truly behave in rooms, and how small inefficiencies quietly erode profitability. This is a conversation about the hidden gaps in hospitality performance, the myths we tell ourselves about ROI, and what it really takes to design and to operate properties that outperform. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited for this conversation. I would love for you to start by telling us how you got into this world and what keeps you in it, because you really need to love it.
I've been in this space almost my entire adult life. I went to a hotel school and then jumped into operations and then into consulting for hospitality and tourism, then to banking and then to ownership for two public companies before I started with the partner our own shop. I don't come from a family of hotel people. I come from a family of attorneys. I took a different path, and fortunately, that path is something that I grew to love every day. Clearly, I'm still doing it. And I think it's the nature of this business. It's so different every day that probably is what keeps me engaged and involved as much as I am and curious.
How did you fall into it? Is that something that you always knew, or was there an experience that kind of, opened your eyes to this world?
This kind of journey started when I was like 15, and it really was something not even hotel related. I like to eat and I like to go out to restaurants. So I thought maybe I'd like to be a chef. I've never really cooked beyond chocolate chip cookies or, occasional quesadilla at home. And then, fast forward a little bit, my grandfather went to Cornell where they had a hotel school, and he told me about this hotel school. I said, oh, that sounds, as a 15-year-old does. I said, that sounds cool. Like I can own a hotel with a restaurant and still cooking it. That was literally the genesis of what got me into this business, was chocolate chip cookies, I guess. But yeah, no exposure, no understanding. My first real hotel job or waiting job or anything was after my freshman year of college into the actual hotel space. Worked in housekeeping at a hotel in Santa Monica Beach, California. But yeah, and that's how it started. And it's just kind of grown from there.
What was the most eye-opening experience that you had early on in your career or at a certain point that kind of either made you pivot or was kind of eye-opening for you?
It's evolved. Right. So, starting out, it was just naive, right? Just I'm working in hotels. I don't really know what that means, to then understanding, well, what's driving above property decisions, right? So, I think my first job out of college, it was at a hotel in downtown DC. And, I think my curiosity with numbers started back then was I was in front office, and how did we decide what rates to charge what guests? Right. And were we maximizing, it was kind of like early revenue management in my brain. Were we maximizing the revenue by room type? And, I literally, my off time, one time went up to the accounting where they had the little old file sheets and would write down the different rates by room type to see, are the 10 suites really generating the most revenue, by day, or were the regular rooms because the hotel was upgrading so many different VIP guests. And that was kind of the start of the curiosity about how to run hotels and how the decisions are made, not just at the property level, but then there's always somebody above you helping you direct your decision tree. But that was kind of the start of it all.
Was there anything from that experience that you pulled out that affected the way that you managed or, worked within hotels? in the future.
One thing I think is lost for a lot of people today is they go from, college to maybe private equity or finance, and hotels is still a people business. And while numbers dictate profitability and debt service, there's an intrinsic component that really dictates success in this industry. And so my experience at the property level gave me both insights and empathy to how to be successful in this business, and how to communicate the balance between needing to say cut costs but not ignoring the human impact in those decisions, right? And I had the benefit of working for private companies, for public companies, and it's interesting how decisions are passed down from the ownership to the property and what the ramifications of those decisions are. You're in a public company, you have investors that need certain set of returns. You have to asset manage in a way that helps maximize that profitability for the shareholders. That doesn't necessarily always translate in considering the employee impact. And so today, working in a private company, we have the benefit of understanding our decisions on a more micro level. And I take all those experiences from the operations with me in every decision or conversation I have.
Absolutely. I would argue that our financial decision impact, or the decisions that we make for the good of the financial impact, could negatively impact the people that are using the spaces. And thus we start out wanting it to be a good financial impact, but it ultimately negatively impacts the bottom line.
Thinking of design stuff, right? And then the finance, right? You see a lot of hotels with bunk beds, right? And, as a parent, my nightmare was trying to change the top bed of a bunk bed, right? You then apply that to a commercial space that may have 50 bunk beds and a room attendant that needs to clean 15 rooms. It's one thing to clean 15 rooms, but then, have to get on a ladder to try to change the sheets or, flip the mattress. It's a whole different math.
Higher insurance.
Yeah, it's a whole different math, right? And, from a finance standpoint, you're saying, well, if I have 4 beds in a room and I can get $40 a bed, right? It looks great. But you're not really thinking about that operational challenge, making that decision.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of decisions that could be made from a very financial standpoint, but they don't really take into consideration the experience of the guest or the operational side as well.
Agreed.
So talk to us more about like the ROI versus maintenance debate. Is like most hotel CapEx actually ROI, or is it preventing loss, and the idea of negative ROI?
I think most renovations is avoiding erosion, right? And that kind of negative ROI. Yes, the newest, shiniest hotel always seems to get the most business lease out of the gate, and you are trying to play catch up or stay the same level. You're not necessarily getting ahead, right? If I renovate my guest room, that is not an ROI. And I know a lot of people would argue with me differently, but if you're just doing a refresh, that is just staying status quo. If you are redoing the F&B because the brand requires it, that's just the status quo. If you add a ballroom, that's an ROI. If there's something additive to me, that's an ROI. But I think that we spend so much money just maintaining, getting to that ROI is very challenging, because at the end of the day, we're almost depleted of that capital. Unless you kind of allocate it, or you're in a financial situation as a big company, maybe you can allocate resources differently. But, you look at the standard extended stay or select service, whatever, the stuff on the highways, ROI is not the math. It's maintaining your operation and of trying to avoid negative commentary as much as possible while maximizing your profitability.
Would you say that's different for boutique hotels?
Yeah, well, boutiques are really unique in the sense that they have to kind of almost recreate themselves. It feels like on a different scale, right? And I read, about the different experts in that boutique space where, do you make a boutique just for Instagram or because it becomes a really unique experience, right? And there's a disconnect in some of that. But it feels to me, and I haven't dabbled that much in boutique space, but that what can be considered unique and special today can wear off pretty quickly depending on which way the wind blows. And it feels like that's almost sometimes it can be a faster negative ROI if your initial investment to create that boutique experience isn't done appropriately.
My feeling is that, and tell me your thoughts, that when a property is doing their PIP, that they can do it strategically rather than just, blanket updates, looking at the comps and looking at what the market is wanting, maybe things have shifted. And when they're doing it, being more strategic, maybe adding amenities or certain things like that, that would actually give them an ROI, even if it might be smaller than just out of the gate. Like out of the gate for sure, before doing any kind of renovation or upgrades or build outs, there needs to be a plan of how can we maximize, as you've said in our previous conversations, per square foot revenue, right? But is there any room whatsoever when doing a PIP to strategically do it to then add something so that they can shift to a maybe higher nightly rate?
I think there are. I mean, there obviously hotel brands have made it so it's kind of out of the box, right? And you don't have to think. You just, okay, here's your game plan and I'm going to execute it. But a couple things. One, owners know their hotels better than anybody. And every market, there's a different vibe. So, I'll give an example of a market. We didn't do this personally, but we owned in that market. So in Northwest Arkansas, I think where Walmart's headquartered, there's a huge mountain bike following. Just incredible pass and everything. And there is an opportunity to really embrace that mountain bike culture in that market, even if you own kind of a cookie cutter hotel. So what do? Well, you know that there is an audience for it and they may be staying in your hotel. How do you accommodate that? Can you create mountain bike lockers that charge so they don't have to, so you're not ruining your room. They're not sitting in their car and because they're $5,000 bikes, but they're someplace safe and it's not destroying your hotel carpet. Maybe you make a bike repair station where they can just put it on a jack and do that. And so it may not be an ROI in the sense that you can charge for every little amenity to that, but you now captured a demand because you created an identity for this hotel that's above and beyond the brand standards that wasn't in the brand handbook, but created something unique for that audience.
And it will show up in the occupancy.
Yeah.
Right. That's where you will see the ROI.
Yeah. Because, I'm not a mountain biker, but I know that they hate dragging it to their rooms and, and the hotels don't like it because of the mud or whatever else. But if you even just put a bike rack on the wall where they can hang it, something that says, we see you, it goes a long way. And the guests will tell their friends and then word of mouth, whatever, it builds on that occupancy.
Absolutely. And I think I would say that perhaps they could charge even a little bit more in terms of nightly rate for that. It doesn't have to be exorbitant, but something that would then capture that additional investment.
Exactly. And, guests will pay for things that mean a lot to them. Right? Yeah. Whether that's a mountain bike or some kind of pet amenities beyond just a pet charge. If you meet the guests where they are, they have a much more open time to spending more money to get that, whatever that is. Right?
Absolutely. For us, we have a big family. We have 6 kids. So traveling with hotels, it's such a pain. We have to make sure that we have adjoining rooms and that we don't have too many people or maybe they don't have adjoining rooms, so they have to go around. And when the kids were little, it was so hard. It would be, for us, that would be like if that was taken into consideration, or like families traveling together at, generational, that's also like those kind of things. I love that you brought that up because there is in micro markets, different things that attract guests to that specific area.
Right. I think there are small investments that go a long way that are above and beyond whatever the PIP is that you don't see much of, but that is kind of the window of opportunity, right? Because most people don't do it.
Exactly. Having that strategy in place is so important. And with that, would you say that most people in hospitality measure the wrong things, like over-reliance on RevPAR, ADR, NOI?
Yeah, like we're in this business to make money, right? And it doesn't stop at revenue. And it definitely doesn't stop at room revenue. I think one, if you were to say, look, what's the top line? Then you say, okay, well, let's look at total RevPAR and see how are we maximizing revenue, or what we talked about before, what's our revenue per square foot, right? And that's another level. But the reality is you really need to be looking at how much of that is to the bottom line and what's my EBITDA par, whatever you want to call it, to say I am maximizing my profitability, not maximizing my revenue. I've had the benefit of working for different companies to see both luxury hotels and, economy hotels and everything in between. And there's an old adage that you stay at a luxury property, but you own in a select service one, right? And not the other way around. And there's a reason for that. And you can make $100 million of revenue and still only make $1 million of profit. and you can make $4 million of revenue and $1 million of profit, what's easier? So we lose sight on RevPAR becomes the easiest benchmark because the other stuff is harder to make apples to apples. But I mean, the reality is that's what's the most critical thing to look at.
So if you were consulting for a hotel that was doing 100 mil in revenue, but making very little profit, what would you tell them to turn that ship around?
We have these conversations all day, both with our properties and with clients is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? It's great that you have all these services, but if you're losing money on it or you're making no money on it, what's the benefit? And that's the first question, right? And if it's deemed that, look, we need these amenities, how do we do it smarter so that there's more, coming to the bottom line? Whether that's rethinking how the restaurants are laid out, what kind of food is served, when it's served, and how we staff it to streamline that profitability, right? The culprit in most hotels is labor as a starting point, right? Because it's 50, 60% of our costs. And so that that's the easiest thing to identify. The solution is not necessarily easy, but you kind of have to understand, well, why do I need this much labor? What is it about this hotel, this restaurant, this room that is requiring this much labor? And what can I change? And our conversations with both our hotels and our clients is we need to think about these spaces differently so that we're utilizing the labor better, we're utilizing the space better, and maybe we're even enhancing the revenue better.
What aspects of the hotel need to be built out in a certain way that's going to maximize efficiency and ROI? Because I think it's all about that. It's about not overspending on things that are unnecessary and strategically spending on the things that are going to drive the biggest occupancy and the ability to increase, your ADR.
I got exposed to an interesting hotel last week, and it really opened my eyes to the baseline of your question. And a gentleman is a tech entrepreneur. His wife is in the hotel business, but I don't know to what extent. And they bought an economy hotel in a Florida market that has no visibility from a highway, has, no real redeeming features. It's not in the main location. And since they bought it, they converted it into their own brand. Okay. They did a nice job at the renovation, but nothing that makes it totally special. And it's still locationally restricted, right? Bad location or marginal location. In the year plus that they've converted it, they're the highest scored hotel in the market.
Wow.
Right? Out of 65 hotels, this hotel in this random location with no brand affiliation has 1,700 reviews and it's like a 4.8. Runs in the 80% occupancies. So I guess where I'm going is it made me think like there are ways to bring people in and make them happy without A, having to be affiliated, and B, with maybe not having to go all the way over the top. What I think they've done very well, and this is the first time I've really seen it in action, was they really took and embraced technology in a way that actually made guests happy. And I'm still trying to learn a little bit his secret sauce, but what he said was that we overspent on technology that communicated with the guests. So, you think about these trends about, you have kiosks and you have robots vacuuming the hallway and stuff, but you're losing connection. And, guests don't want to be bothered too much, but they need to know that there's a human somewhere and there's a connection somewhere. And he's invested in software that's helped maintain that communication, right? Whether it's, there's all these texting softwares, but he's found a way to maximize it. And he's found a way on the front end to maximize his visibility with all the, chat GPTs of the world, which is great. But somehow he's also managed to make guests feel good, right? With the product they have. And I've looked at his reviews and it's not perfect, right? People complain about the smells or things not working, but he's still getting a 4.8. So he's clearly found a way to not have to overspend on the physical, but create that guest connection that I think is missing in so many hotels. And so that, this was the first time where I really saw technology in a way that I think is that kind of that secret ROI that I had never seen before.
That's pretty incredible because I yell about this all day long. Why invest in design that is not going to have a return? Do not overspend. There's no reason to do it. As a designer, is it beneficial for portfolio images and all of that. Yeah, absolutely. But it's not for, me being able to sleep at night. I love when my investors are excited about, saving money and being able to increase the profitability of the asset. That gets me up in the morning. That gets me excited.
There's 3 or 4 basic things you have to have in every hotel, right? Before, remember, you may not, but you used to drive down the road and it would say like, we offer internet, right? Like
Mhm.
at some point that was the
That was
the
the thing.
gimmick, but now it's not, right? So what do you have to have? You have to have a great bed. You have to have really good water pressure and warm water. You have to have good Wi-Fi, and then the room has to be clean. And we put all this other froofy stuff, but we miss on the delivery of those core
Yeah.
things. And then there's this whole blowback about how we're designing bathrooms, right? Like, are they open or the barn doors or whatever? And we're designing for image and not for function. And barn doors are expensive and they break.
The tracks fail
The
often.
track failed. They don't create that privacy that a lot of guests want, particularly if you're sharing a room, but they look good. And so I think finding some of those nuances where it's like, look, maybe there's an alternative to a barn door, but it's better than, I don't know, maybe a pocket door, but I'm not advocating one or the other, but
Murphy
maybe
doors
there's
are great
something
too.
that works better and still achieves the outcome, but gives the guests more what they want. And there's a never-ending battle between designers and owners, and then the guests. Like the guests don't have a voice until it's too late.
That's right. That's right. That's why I love looking at reviews. We go through all the data and analyze what's missing.
Yeah.
Whether it's a property, like a new property, then we'll look at the comps and see their reviews and what's the gap in the market that we can fill that they're not doing. Or, if they're doing a renovation, looking at the reviews and saying, like, what are the guests, what are they vocalizing? What's the thing that they're saying needs to be done the most? And then giving it to them. Like, it's not that complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. You think about chefs, right? And a lot of times you hear about these chefs who say before they open their restaurant, they travel to France for 6 weeks or Asia for 6 weeks, whatever they get their inspiration. Most hotel people don't have that benefit, but it would behoove us to be able to say, okay, you know what I want? I want a 50-room leisure hotel in the mountains. I'm going to spend a month going to mountains and outside of Seattle and North Carolina and Maine and understanding what makes certain hotels work and certain don't.
Exactly.
And then talking to my designer and saying, these are the 10 things that work for me. Let's employ it. That doesn't happen, right? So I may like outdoor saunas. So I'm like, hey, I think everybody likes outdoor saunas. And then it gets designed and then maybe no one uses it or it breaks. It's a very disconnected process,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you've seen between those different constituencies.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to centralize more and create systems for. So, like, maybe it's not economical or time efficient to go visit all these things, but there are, yes, you can do a visit here or there, but there are systems that you can put into place to, before you're designing, before you're setting up the rooms and the amenities, to figure out what does the market want, which direction is it going in, what is the micro market saying, like you said about the mountain bikers. That's huge. Understanding that micro economy and understanding what they want is ultimately going to help you create an experience for your guests that is going to blow all the competition out of the water.
Yeah,
So,
agreed.
and tell us about you mentioned like the guest behavior versus design assumptions, like what a dirty room reveals about a guest.
So, yeah, when we look at hotels to buy, one of the things I try to do every time is see not clean rooms, but dirty rooms, because it really reveals what may not work in the room or, guest tendencies. So, or even with our own hotels, I like to do that to understand what is not right. So I'll start with an example of one of our hotels not right. We have a hotel that would have kind of, I would say extended stay guests, but they would stay like 3 or 5 days. And one of the things that was really obvious to me in these dirty rooms was we didn't have trash cans that were big enough. They look good, but everyone's buying pizza or to go, or maybe they're cooking in their room, and you have these aesthetically pleasing but tiny trash cans. And what the guests are left with is this, pile of trash. And even if it's for 6 hours, it's still not visibly attractive. And it wouldn't be what's in a person's home. We design hotels or evolve to design hotels to reflect what people's homes look like, right? I think the TVs is the most obvious example, but there's other examples of that. But there's things that we still don't do, right? And the trash can for me, particularly on the types different hotels, is one of them. So that's an obvious one. But separately, furniture moving is the other. Like I work on my hotel bed generally, so I don't move furniture, but a lot of people don't, and they'll move tables around, they'll move couches around or chairs around to whatever angle, whether it's Maybe sometimes it's not looking at the TV the way it's set up and so forth. Those are really telling because those could affect my guest scores. If someone doesn't like working on a bed and they work on a couch, but then there's no back support and they're not facing the TV or whatever they like to do, they may give you 3 stars instead of 4 or 5. And you really need to understand those trends, particularly if you're planning a renovation. Because then you say, look, 50% of our rooms, the ottoman is moved out of the way. Like, we don't need an ottoman. We maybe need something else. And I think sometimes I miss that. But in general, those are things I like to spend my time doing when I visit properties is say, look, let's give me all the rooms that checked out today and let's go tour them all.
I love that. That's amazing. You get to see how people move. Can you see of those 50 rooms, can you see a pattern that emerges from like they all do the same thing?
Yeah, yeah, you do. You start seeing those patterns, and then when you talk to the general manager or whatever, he's like, "Yeah, that's generally what I see too, right?" And so, then it becomes that next step as an asset manager is to say, "Okay, well, let's pilot this. What if we take 10 rooms and we change it? And when they check out, you go in and see what happens. And maybe it makes the room attendant clean faster. Maybe the guest is happier, whatever it is. Let's try it and move forward in that strategy."
Wow, that's fascinating. I think we were talking before the show about, when you do the demo stays before opening a hotel, that would be really interesting if somebody could give permission to video, them using the room and seeing how they go about movement in the room. And before outfitting the rest of the rooms and then making a decision on whether or not it's worthwhile to purchase or to design things in a certain way. Would that be something that could help hotels as well?
Oh, 100%. And well, we can't, not easily done in the guest room, obviously. And I know the brands have demo rooms, but they actually do that. But, one thing that we can learn from retailers is they do that with stores. And at one point, I was talking with a technology company that takes your CCTV, they do for retailers, and they heat map movement. And so you can see from a retail standpoint where guests were stopping at which clothes on display. Now, imagine that for a restaurant, right? Or that has a buffet set up, or, a pool area where, which chairs do people go to? Where do people congregate? Where is the longest line? And not only did they do that, but then they can track how long the wait time was at the register just based on heat maps and monitoring people movement and what time of day it was. So think about the public space studies you could do before you ever did a renovation and understand not only where the log jams are or where people touch stuff or how you should set up your market, but then also how you staff, because you now know that based on these, analysis that 80% of your customers come in between these 2 hours. And it's a totally different staffing model that way.
And then it goes back to what you said about the labor, right? That labor
Right.
is 60%, right? If there's inefficiencies that aren't tracked, you're still going to have that bloat. But if you find those inefficiencies and you can perhaps bring in technology or specific strategies to make that more efficient, then you increase profitability. And in your next PIP, you design it entirely different around that.
Yeah. I mean, now we're talking. I mean, I think about it from a banquet standpoint. And if you have the experience, you go into a banquet, a reception, and there may be 2 or 3 bars, but there's one bar that's got 50 people in line and there's 2 that have none. Well, there's something wrong with that design. There's something wrong with it because it shouldn't be that. And so even that could change the way you lay out your banquets that enhance your guest experience. It means that maybe more people are having beverages that obviously run up the bill more, right? It means more profitability. So there's a lot of different places you can do this that either help with cost or help, enhance your revenue that aren't employed today.
Love that. If you could leave our audience with what the future of hospitality looks like, if you had a crystal ball, what would you say is the biggest lever for ROI for hotel owners?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. And I don't have an easy answer because at the end of the day, it's a service industry. So there's a certain level that is expected. Technology will be the answer for a lot of things. It is not the solution to this business. There's always going to be a service component for most hotels, right? And understanding how you blend the technology to maximize your service delivery, I think is really going to be the crux for the whole industry. Just hiring fewer people to service the guest isn't the answer. It's really balancing the service and the technology to maximize kind of your cost and your kind of delivery of product.
Do you see that direct bookings will also through that as well, through the use of AI and technology?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a huge thing. And again, this one example was the first time I really saw it in action in a location that generally would tell you if you're not branded, you die. So it was the first time I actually saw proof in the pudding that if you leverage your technology right, you can generate great direct bookings and not have to be reliant on brands. Now, brands do an incredible job bringing guests to your rooms, but it's not as much now as it used to be. And probably more so in the future, that technology will be a greater influencer in directing people to your hotel.
I love it. I think you're absolutely right. I can see direct bookings become a bigger source in the future for hotel owners.
Agreed.
If our audience wants to learn more about what you do, if they want to connect, how can they do so?
Sure. I mean, reach me at my email is michael@woodmontlodging.com. Happy to talk to anybody who has follow-up questions.
Amazing. Amazing. Michael, thank you so much for your insight. What a pleasure having you on. And I know our audience will glean a lot from this episode.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for the time.